Slideshow. Okay. All right. So today, again, our topic is the power of perspective. My name is Jessica Reño. I'm the clinical director at Mightier. We're going to be really focusing today on like the role of perspective taking in emotional regulation and conflict management, something that we all might struggle with at times, but especially for Mightier kids, we know this comes up. We're going to take a really specific look at the executive functioning skills required for perspective taking, because again, these are very relevant for a number of Mightier kids, regardless of whether or not they have a diagnosis, right? That executive functioning piece is pretty important. And then we're going to look at a bunch of activities. If you've done Mightier things with us before, like we're very much about skill building. We want to help a child build a skill through practice, through play. We don't want to just talk about the idea. We want to play with the idea. We want to engage with the idea. We believe that truly is the best way, one, for engagement, but also two, to help a child build that ability rather than just like build like a cognitive understanding of something. So our agenda today is we're going to talk about what it takes. So those executive functioning elements of perspective taking. We're going to talk about those emotional regulation ties, the role in conflict. We have a strategy we've put together. We're calling the C strategy. We like to wrap everything up in a metaphor. So our kid-facing metaphor for perspective taking is this idea of a perspectacle, like glasses that you wear that help you see another person's point of view. So we're going to come back to this idea of perspectacles. Just so happens that the 3-step strategy that we put together lines up with the word C. Perfect. So I'll go through that. And then I'll take you through the activities that you can use at home or in therapy sessions with kids. Most of these are not for them to do independently. They are for you to do with them or for them to do with another child. They work in group settings as well. So these are things that require play and involvement from everyone. All right. So first, let's just start with like, why is perspective taking? What is it and why is it important? This is going to be, I think we all know what perspective taking is and why it's important. But just to restate, it's perspective taking is that ability to see or think about another person's point of view, right? It is our attempt to understand where someone else is coming from. This is slightly different than empathy, right? This is different from understanding or attempting to understand how someone else feels. They are very connected. They are very associated with one another, but they are different, right? This is more about like the cognitive piece. And now, why is this important? So we all have different perspectives, of course. We all have different backgrounds, thoughts, emotions, interpretations of things. It's very natural that we all have different perspectives. This is normal. Conflicts often arise when we don't see eye to eye with another person, right? We can see this play out in our own lives when we get into an argument with someone, or we have like a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of something. Perspective taking is also more difficult in the heat of the moment. So this is where it becomes really, really relevant for Mightier kids who also struggle with emotional regulation. It is harder to see another person's perspective when you are really angry or when you are really anxious or when you are really overwhelmed. That's important to note because you might see that play out for your child in real life. And it means that like doing these exercises while they are also playing Mightier and building that emotional regulation, like that's a really nice pairing. It is also a skill that can be more challenging for autistic and ADHD kids. So there are specific executive functioning skills we're about to go through that are really important for seeing another person's perspective. And if you struggle with those skills naturally, if your brain just has a harder time with those things, it makes sense that perspective taking is also going to be a bit more challenging. That doesn't mean it's not important, right? It actually means it's really important, and it means it's really important that we practice. All right, so let's start with this, that executive functioning piece. So this, the way this works is we're just across the top looking at 4 specific executive functioning skills. Inhibitory control, right? So that ability to that's impulse control, right? The ability to stop yourself from reacting, stop a thought in its tracks, put the pause on, right? This is something we practice in Mightier all the time. Pause before, take that pause, take that moment to stop. And then do something about it. That's a second step, but this moment of pause. Cognitive flexibility, flexible thinking, right? The ability to see other points of view, see things from different angles, think about things in a number of different ways. Working memory, so that ability to, in the moment of what's going on, also remember information from the past, pull out relevant information that's going to help you in this situation, right? While you're also in the moment and attending to something in the present. And then reflection and awareness. So just being aware of yourself, aware of other people, being able to reflect on that. So the way each of these relates to perspective taking, for inhibitory control, right, that pause, if in perspective taking, it's very important to interrupt our own thoughts, right? We're seeing something from our own perspective, we're feeling a certain way about it. In order to see someone else's perspective, we kind of have to interrupt our own train of thought in order to consider someone else's, right? So if you struggle with this, with inhibitory control, it actually might be hard to take that moment to pause and switch gears. Cognitive flexibility. So this would be the ability to think about a situation in a number of different ways, or specifically from the other person's perspective. If cognitive flexibility is hard, if it's hard for your brain to make that shift, perspective taking is also going to be a bit harder, right? It's going to be harder to get there naturally. We have to practice it. Working memory. So remembering or thinking through how others might respond, might be interpreting a situation, pulling out information about, okay, well, this is what I know about this person. This is how they might be interpreting a situation. Therefore, they might be seeing it in this way while you're also in the moment, right? So again, all of that is really important in terms of seeing another person's perspective. And then on the reflection side, just considering the thoughts and feelings of others, you have to kind of be able to be aware of the other person and reflect on them, or reflect on yourself even in that moment. So again, very important and understandably a bit extra challenging for a lot of kids. Now let's talk about emotional regulation a little bit. So seeing other points of view when we're upset. So if we think about let's focus on anger. Usually this comes up, I think, when we're angry. Think about how your brain works when you're calm versus when you're angry, right? When we're calm, we are best able to recognize how we feel, think clearly, think flexibly, communicate clearly. We have time to process information, right? Our brains are working to the best of their ability when they are calm. Now, imagine that time you get into you're really, really angry, right? You're intensely angry about something. Think of something from your own life and think about what's happening in your brain and body, right? You can there's a physiological response, right? Your heart starts racing, your muscles are tense. You might feel heat in your body, right? We're moving into that fight or flight response here. And what's happening is that because our body's sort of shifting into this, we need to respond, we need to react quickly. It's actually prioritizing the physiological prep work rather than the cognitive pieces that it could typically engage with. Meaning it's harder, our brains aren't working in the same way. So we have impaired cognitive flexibility. We kind of get tunnel vision. We see things on one track. We hyper focus on something maybe. We have trouble formulating thoughts. Maybe trouble communicating clearly, trouble processing information flexibly or accurately, because all of those things aren't the priority if we are truly in danger or need to defend ourselves or need to react quickly, right? Those cognitive pieces don't really matter so much in those moments, which is why the brain and body sort of make this shift. So all that to say, it also makes sense that perspective taking in general is harder to do when we are intensely upset about something. Again, if your kid is playing Mightier, this is why like this pairing is so important, in that they're building emotional regulation alongside practicing other sorts of skill building pieces like perspective taking, because the emotional regulation is sort of this foundational piece that's going to allow them to like build these other skills in a more like in a stronger way. Okay, so how are we going to do this? This is how we're going to approach like learning and what our activities are really built around. So one, we're going to remember that perspective taking is a skill. Kids don't learn to ride a bike by talking about bikes, right? We have to get on the bike. We have to practice riding the bike. We have to build our balance, build our reaction time. So we're going to play with, that's when we say we use play, like we're playing with these things. We are like trying to like physically and cognitively play with perspective taking as we go through these activities. We're going to use play in terms of like, it is fun. It promotes deeper learning, engagement, and motivation, which is incredibly important when we're trying to get kids to work on things. And then we're going to break things apart into like little bite-sized concepts. So you'll see alongside each activity, I've listed out the learning goals, and they're a little different. There's some overlap, but they're a little different for each activity. So there's not too much going on within each one. And then here's just so you can see our C strategy that we're, in case it's helpful for kids to sort of think about this. Okay, I have 3 steps to see someone else's point of view. One is the pause, stop, and put on perspectacles. We'll introduce kids to the perspectacles. Examine the situation from the other perspective. How would they think and feel? So start considering the other person. And then 3 is explore solutions by asking questions and listening. So actually communicate with the other person and learn their perspective, right? So middle step is sort of like that consideration and hypothesizing and guesswork. And 3 is like actually figure it out, like actually talk to the person so you can understand their perspective. So the strategies are going to go through all of those steps. All right, so, the activities are going to go through all the steps. Our first activity, we're calling this or that. This one was in the skill pack as well, so you may have seen this already. This is very introductory, pretty basic activity. You're presented, you would do this with your child, could be a family activity, could be a group of kids. You're presented with like 2 different choices. The choices are basically like have the same weight in terms of, like you really could go either way on each of these. And you make a choice, right? Which of these do you prefer? And it's a conversation now. So one thing that's happening is that in that conversation, we're learning like, oh, okay, people have different preferences than I do. People have different perspectives than I do. And then also it starts to get into asking people questions about their perspective. So the sheet that goes along with this has a bunch of prompts to try to help kids practice asking the question, like, why do you choose this over something else? Why do you prefer this over something else? Things like that. So very introductory. The next one is we're calling a new way to see. This involves some role playing. You don't have to do it. You don't have to role play it. But if you're up for that, it could be a fun way to go about it. I think it would make it a little more engaging. The way this works, here's where we introduce kids to that C strategy, but the actual activity, and there's a second sheet that goes along with this. The actual activity is that there are a number of different, very quick snippets of a situation. And in these situations, you can read that like, here's what's happening. And this person was feeling like, there's 2 people in each one. And the goal is to afterwards separate out person one's perspective and person two's perspective. So like be able to outline both of those. If you're role playing, one person plays person one and one person plays person two, and you can actually have the conversation if you want, or you could just sort of fill it out and complete the work afterwards together or individually. I complete it for person one, this person completes it for person two. But really it's getting you, one, to see how not seeing eye to eye, not considering another person's perspective can lead to conflict, arguments, misunderstanding, right? So we're trying to communicate to kids, this is why it's important. This is why perspective taking is actually really, really important in your life. Learn that 3-step strategy and practice seeing 2 different perspectives. So that's what this activity gets at. This one is a little more on the, a little bit more on like the therapeutic homeworky side. If you can turn it in, if you can do the role play element, it makes it more fun. But just so you have, that going into it, it's a little bit less game-based than some of our other stuff. All right, now we have a leveling story. So we're using Cruise. Cruise was also in the skill pack. There are a couple more Cruise sheets that you're going to get. This is Cruise's little bio. So here it outlines Cruise, and sort of why and how he gets stuck on his perspective sometimes, and then Cruise gets perspectivals, and he learns the C strategy, right? But in the actual activity, there's a conflict that Cruise is in with another leveling. It has to do with them playing kickball. And you need to help Cruise solve that conflict. So you're going to help walk Cruise through use of the C strategy in the activity. And basically what Cruise is going to have to do is he's going to have to ask questions of this other leveling in order to solve the issue and calm things down. So there's some sheets that go along with this that walk kids through how to do that. Again, all from the perspective of these fictional levelings. All right, and then our next activity, this is our second to last one. This one is going to be the most fun of the group. So this is I Spy with my perspectical eye. This is an I Spy game in a way with a little twist. So you're going to be asking questions to learn about another's perspective. The way this works is I would silently pick something on this page. And then whoever I'm playing with is going to ask me questions like, okay, well, let's see. They're going to they want to guess what image I've picked. But in order to do that, they're going to ask me questions like, how does it make you feel? What does it remind you of? What do you think it looks like? They can make up their own questions. We have some prompts on the bottom, but they can make up their own questions for this. So, if I picked the watermelon, then, they're asking me questions about how watermelon makes me feel or what it reminds me of, right? To see if they can, a few things. 1, practice asking the questions. 2, use the information that I'm giving them and also what they know about me in order to figure out which one I've chosen, right? So it is sort of combining, all right, I'm hearing your answers, but I'm also taking in what I know about you as a person, and I'm using that to guess which choice you would have made. And you can go back and forth on this. I actually play this with, I have 4.5-year-old daughters, and I play this with them, and they could do it, which I was kind of surprised about, that they were able to engage with this at that level. So if you have younger kids, this is appropriate for younger kids also. Okay, and then our last one is, again, more therapeutic, self-application and reflection. So this is more of a worksheet, but if you have a child who will engage with this, or you are working in a therapy session with a child, very appropriate. So this is we're calling this flip the script. So it's asking a child to think back on a conflict that they have had recently, could be with anyone, kind of rewrite out what happened, write out their perspective on what happened, then put on the perspectivals and try to see it from the other person's point of view. Write the same situation out from the other person's point of view. And then after you've done that, reflect on, do you feel any differently about the situation now that you have considered the other person's perspective? Not that you truly know what their perspective was, right? This person might not be in front of you. You haven't had the chance to ask them questions, but by reflecting on their perspective, do you feel any differently? Hopefully the answer is yes, right? If this is something they had been angry about, hopefully the answer is yes, and they are considering the other possibilities. Seeing like something could have been a miscommunication or something like that. So really what this is doing is it's bringing all of those perspective-taking learnings into and applying them to a conflict in your real life. You're practicing seeing another person's perspective, and then you're considering how perspective taking influences your thoughts and feelings about a situation. This can also be used as like pretty repeatedly. If a child will engage with this, this is worth using repeatedly as a tool to help process a situation that has happened. So if they are struggling with something that happened recently, happened that day, you could try doing this, maybe not in the heat of the moment, but like when they're a little bit outside of the heat of the moment, this is a good tool for helping them process the whole situation. And that is it for our activities. I see a question coming in. I'm gonna just as a closer, just so you know, feel free to, I'm gonna send you by email all of these activities afterwards. And if you have like requests for future topics, workshops, like something you want your child, like a skill that sort of centers around emotional regulation, emotional awareness, conflict management, anything like this that you really want your child to work on and build, send the request my way. We may actually have materials already, or it just lets us know specifically what you're interested in, and we can build around that. All right, let me take a look at the question coming in. Okay. Question was, will these resources be sent following the webinar? Yes, they will. I'll be emailing them to you. Hopefully later today. If not later today, then tomorrow. They'll be in your inbox. All right. Any other questions? Feel free to pop them in the chat. But otherwise, thank you all for joining. And I'll see you next time.